All right, so in this week's lesson, we're going to be talking about intervals. We're going to talk about what they are, how you find them, how you use them, and why they're so important when it comes to improvising or creating a melody. If you really want to understand the language of music, you have to understand intervals and how one note relates to another. That's how people are able to improvise and create what they have in their head and make it come out of their fingers, is because they're speaking that language. It's also the same process that happens if you see somebody that listens to somebody play something or hears a song in the radio and they can just sit down at an instrument and just play it in real time. They understand intervals and they understand how they work. And so that's what we're going to be taking a look at in this video. It doesn't matter if you're a guitar player or whatever instrument you play. Even if you don't play an instrument at all, you just use your voice, you can use this video. So in this video, we're going to go through all of that information. If you'd like to get the extra materials that come with this lesson, I have 12 MP3 jam tracks. I actually have one in every key so that you can practice playing these intervals in any key. I've got 3 quizzes that come with this, which are a great ear training exercise. The quizzes are randomized every time you take them so that you can, you can always try and guess what the notes are. That's really the point of the quiz. And then the last thing will be an extra video, which is a follow the leader style video where I play something, you play something, we sort of play it together. Again, you don't even have to be a guitar player. You can do it with your voice or whatever, but you're just trying to hear those sounds. That's really what this is all about, is getting the sound in your head and being able to label it, identify it, and then recreate it. So you can get those extra things by going to activemelody.com, go to the weekly lessons page, and do a search for EP492. Okay, what is an interval? That's the first question we have to answer. Very simple answer. It's just the space between 2 notes. You take a note, you take another note, and that space between them is called an interval. It sort of makes sense. It's pretty logical when you think of it that way. So what we're going to be looking at here is we're going to be looking at the key of B. And I chose the key of B because it's right in the middle of the fretboard. But we're going to start with the B major scale. All of these intervals really come from the major scale. They're versions of the major scale. They're labels of the major scale. You're going to understand it as we get into it. It makes perfect sense. But here's how I want those of you that are following along on guitar. This is how I want you to play. We're going to play the same major scale in the same position just to make it easy. So we're going to line up our fingers as follows. Our index finger is going to go over the 6th fret. Middle is going to go over the 7th. Ring over the 8th, and pinky over the 9th. And we're going to start with the 9th fret, 4th string. We're going to play that B note. And we're going to walk up the major scale like this. So we're going to go to our 3rd string now and play 6th, 8, 9. And then we're going to go up to the 2nd string and play 7, 9. And then we're going to go to the 1st string and play 6, 7. We're going to play our major scale, or B major scale, in that position. I want you to be able to play up. It doesn't have to be fast. Just be familiar with it and then play down it. So be able to at least get that under your fingers. Now here's how I want you to connect this. I want you to connect this using the cage system, which I'm always talking about, but connect it to your E chord shape. Now this is a B chord because we're playing the B major scale, but I'm using the E shape. If you look at these 3 fingers, they're making the first position E shape, right? So now you've got your B chord and your B major scale. Just remember, you start with your pinky. That's your starting point on that 9th fret, 4th string. Okay, so once you're able to play that and understand your major scale, we're going to now put a number to each of those notes. We're not going to talk about note names. We're just going to really be talking more about numbers, and those numbers will represent this distance between notes. But we've got 1, it's also called our root sometimes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Those are the 7 numbers. Now once you get back here, you're back to 1 again. You don't really say 8, you just go back to 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is pretty basic. It's just a number to each note. Okay, now I'm going to talk through this very quickly. We're just going to talk through these intervals, but the real value is going to be in a minute. I'm going to put on a jam track and I'm going to give you examples, and I want you to start to really hear this stuff. But the first interval is we're going to take our root note and we're going to play the second step in the major scale. I want you to hear that relationship. When you're playing 2 notes separate like that, it's called melodic. You're playing melodically. If you play them together like that, it's called harmonically. But we're going to be listening melodically for this. And one thing that helps people is to identify a basic song that uses this interval relationship. So one that comes to mind is Happy Birthday. Happy Birthday, the first two notes, right? So the first two notes of Happy Birthday go from your 1 to your 2. Okay, the next note we're going to look at is our 4. We're going to skip the 3 for now. You'll see why. So our 4 is up here. It's just above where we played our 1 on the guitar anyway, right? So with this one, that would be like the first two notes in Here Come the Bride, right? So you've got Happy Birthday, and then you've got Here Come the Bride, like that. Now, once we get, the further into this we get, trying to remember these songs becomes problematic, I think. And so what I'll end up doing is just counting the steps of the major scale. So if somebody said, tell me what this interval is, I might go, what song is that? I can't remember. Well, what I would do is I'd go start with this root and I go da, 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 count it 1, 2, 3, 4 in my head. Okay, so that's the 4th interval. Now, these, instead of just calling it 2 or 4, they actually have official names. Now, I don't really refer to them as that, and I'll give them to you just so you know what they are. But the official name would be a major second. And when we get to the 4th, it's called a perfect 4th. It just sounds so pretentious, but that's what it's called. So you have a major second and a perfect 4th. That's what those intervals are. Now we skipped the 3, and the reason for that is I want you to listen to, first of all, we'll start with this 2. If I were to play a chord, now this is where it gets interesting. First of all, it doesn't sound like it's resolved. So the 1 and the 2, it's not resolved, right? It's just sort of floating. If I play the 1 and the 4, it's not resolved either. Again, floating, or another better word for that might be suspended. So when we think about our suspended chords, sus chords, like the B sus 4 chord, that's my suspended. There's my 4th interval. That's where that comes from. And then the B sus 2, that's where that comes from. So the reason it's suspended, the reason it's suspended is it's just floating. It needs to land on something. Once we play the 3, listen. Okay, it landed. The plane came down, it landed. Sort of like the necessary note that we were waiting for. This is a note that works. That interval, that major second, that perfect 4th is also obviously one that you use, but they seem to be more on their way to something more solid like this, right? So those would be more like support notes. This would be more like your foundation. Okay, so that's called the major third. And it sounds pretty, it's beautiful. And when we talk about harmonized thirds, that's what that is. It's your root and your 3rd interval. A song with that would be like When the Saints Go Marching In, right? Da, 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 da. So you need to hear that 3rd interval. We're going to go in more depth here in a minute, so if I'm going too fast, just stick with me. But that's our that's our major 3rd. Now, listen to this. Ooh. See how sad that is, changing with that one note? There's our major 3rd. If we flat the 3rd, you get what's called a minor 3rd interval. Now I can take the 2, the 4, and play the minor 3rd, and I get a totally different vibe. See how sad that sounds? It's by flatting the 3rd or creating that minor 3rd, you get a very minor sound. You're getting that kind of sad sound. If you're trying to identify that interval by ear, a song example would be Greensleeves or What Child Is This? Same song, but it's da ba bum. You know, that the first 2 notes of that's a minor 3rd. So we've looked at our 2nd, our 4th, and our 3rd. And our minor 3rd. And so what I like to do is just kind of group them. So our first 4 intervals, 2nd, minor 3rd, 3rd, and 4th, I just kind of put them in a little group here. I think it makes it easiest. And so when I've got the quizzes, I've got those quizzes as 2, 3, and 4. So that first quiz that you're going to look at just focuses on those 4 intervals and getting those under your ear first. Is that the way you say that? Okay, so the next 4 that we're going to group together are going to be 5, 6, flat 7, and 7. Those are going to be the next 4. And actually, that's the end of it. We're going to end it there with those intervals. I'm not going through all 12. I think it's too much. It's overkill. These are the main ones. I'm giving you the main course here. You can create just about any song with these. It doesn't mean the other ones aren't important, but for now, we're really looking at these 8 intervals. So the next 4, we're going to go back to our root, which is our B, and then I'm going to come up here. That would be the 5th. So that's called a perfect 5th. That's the name. So you have a perfect 4th and perfect 5th. Those are the only 2 perfects we have. But to me, that's the easiest interval to hear. If I hear that, I automatically know what it is. And so I think of like Superman, you know, the John Williams score. Did I play that? Yeah. That sound is the perfect 5th. It's also 2001 Space Odyssey. So that's your perfect 5th. We'll just call that our 5th interval. I'm going to go now to the 6th, which is up here. Remember, these are just the notes from your major scale, but you take your root and your 6th. Listen to those 2. This one's hard. To me, the 6th interval and the 4th interval are the 2 most difficult. They're just sort of, they don't sound resolved, but they're pretty. But it's hard to sort of put your finger on that sound. Now, an example of that would be My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean. Right? The first 2 notes of that. Also, NBC, you know, the old NBC thing? That thing. So that's a 6th. The distance between here and here, the root, it's called a major 6th. Now we'll go to the 7th, which is like this. Now this one is really interesting because when you listen to them together, ooh, does that sound awful? It's a dissonant sound, but yet it's still pretty. It shouldn't work because you have the root note, which is your B, and then you've got the note right behind it. And when you play them together, you get that sound. But if you think of a major 7 chord, that's where that sound comes from, that note. So that's our major 7 sound. And I'm going to give examples of all of this in just a minute. A song example would be the song Take On Me by a-ha, that 80s song. You know the chorus of that? That's a melody line for that. That was a little difficult to come up with an example. But this one is easy once you understand it. When we put on the jam track, it's going to make more sense. And now we get to my favorite interval, which is where we take our 7, but we flat the 7. And you get this sound. And that to me is the blues. When I hear that, that's the blues. So listen. There's your B7 chord. B7, that's where that 7 comes from, right? It's our flat 7 that we've added to our major chord. We put that note in there to give it that 7 sound. But if I wanted to land on that note, it sounds bluesy. That's why that's why I like it so much, because I use it in the blues all the time. But the flat 7 is an interval that you should be able to identify as well. Okay, so I have the jam track playing in the background, and it's just a B played over and over again. Just looping. There's no other chords. We're just going to react to this B note because we're take these intervals of the B major scale, and I want you to hear what they sound like when you play them against this B note. So we're going to start with the root. I'm just going to play along with it. Now watch this. We're going to go to our 2nd. Just get that sound in your head. And then go back to the B. You need to hear that sound, that interval. So if I'm playing, here's why. If I'm playing a lead, I could land on that. And here, that's the sound. That's a sound. Now, it's not resolved. Remember, it's kind of suspended sounding. That's why you need to hear those intervals and hear them in your head first. Then you can recreate that sound. Now, if I wanted the more stable, I would land on that 3rd, the major 3rd. So it'd be like this. Hear how perfect that sounds? It sounds like it landed, like the plane landed there. There's the second. And we go back to our root. Now, I'm going to go to the minor third, which is like this. See how that just pulls it in a whole different direction when you hear it with a jam track. Now I can play that minor third with the second. And you get a very minor, dark sound. So if I wanted that sound, I could just slide into it. Now I'm starting by playing a little major pentatonic scale thing. That's all I'm doing there, but I'm good. I can bend into it. And then you go into your minor pentatonic scale, you get a whole different vibe. But that's why it's important to hear these intervals. If I wanted to go to the fourth, I could play that fourth, which could take me into the minor thing, or to the major like this. Watch this. Again, that four, you don't want to necessarily land on it. You could, but it wants to go somewhere else. It wants to land usually on the 1, the 3, or the 5. Those are the 3 legs of the stool that make it sound more stable. Those are also the same 3 notes in your B major chord. So there's our 4. Let's listen to the 5. Remember, that was Superman. But that's another very stable, safe place to land. So if you're playing a little pentatonic thing, you want to land on that 5, that's the sound you're going to get. Now, let's get into the 6th. That's another one that's kind of hard for me to hear when I'm just trying to identify that. It wants to go somewhere else. It wants to go back to the 5, or to the 3, or to the 1, because those are stable. You hear that? It just depends. It depends on the context. Now let's get into the fun ones. I love that major 7. Listen to this. So when we think of that major 7 chord, you get that sound, right? But it's all that you're really doing is playing that one note. That's what colors it. So if you're playing a lead break, I'm playing the major pentatonic again, and you wanted to just work in that major 7 sound, you just take your root and you go down 1 to pull that sound into your lead. You can also bend, between that major 7 sound and the root, however you want to do that. The last one we'll look at, which is my favorite, is the flat 7. Listen to that. There it is against the 5. That's sounding bluesy. So if you're playing a blues lead or blues thing, you can land on that 7, that flat 7, and get that bluesy sound. It's also in your minor pentatonic, right? Bend into it. There's my 5. There's my 3. There's my 1. There's my 5. Hear it? 7, 6. I'm just using the intervals we've already talked about. So I can start taking all of these things and putting them together in real time, playing what I hear, and that's how you do it, is just getting comfortable with the 2 to the 3, or the 4 to the 3. Just getting comfortable with those intervals. Now you know what they are, you know what the names are, and you can start using them. Well, I hope that's been helpful in understanding what these intervals are and how they sound in context. It's one thing to talk about it, but until you actually hear it, that's when you really start connecting the dots. And then when you start doing it yourself, you even connect the dots further. And that's when you can start speaking the language. Check out Active Melody if you haven't. I've got 10 years worth of in-depth lessons like this. All the lessons have lots of support material that go with them, tablature, extra videos, MP3 jam tracks. This lesson in particular has the extra quizzes and the MP3 jam tracks that go with it as well. All right, if you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, I would encourage you to hit the subscribe button, hit the alert bell. That way we can stay in touch. I put out new videos like this every week. All right, we'll see you next week for something new.